Mr. VE, you'll be staying anonymous for this, but I really do thank you for reaching out to me. And a few people who watch my videos, they will somewhat be aware of who you are. You're a PhD holder, and you've helped me out with some information to educate myself as well about chips in this war. And look, can you just introduce, I guess, who you are, what your background actually is?
Yeah, of course, of course. Thank you, Matt, for having me here. Uh, as you said, I'm a PhD in electrical and electronics engineering, and my specialty is in communications. I never worked for a defense company directly, but as the university and defense industry collaboration, I did some work aligned with defense industry. So I I have a good grasp on the electronics part of this, and I can share my educated guesses with you and with the audience.
Mate, and we really thank you so much because I know you and I correspond a little bit through some encrypted apps as well as some email. And a lot of the stuff you're telling me, I'm like, I don't know what this is. It's so hard to sort of decrypt uh, because I don't, people know I struggle to open a PDF document, but I really do appreciate that. Um, but the biggest thing, I guess, that you've opened my eyes to, and something we've seen become very obvious through this war, was in the beginning of this, and I even would have reported on this, and many others reported on this, including officials. We were expecting the Western monopoly on chips to have a huge effect on Russia's ability to produce high level electronic weapon systems. And we haven't really seen much or if any effect on that. There was a CBC article maybe only yesterday, the day before, that spoke that Russia's actually increased the amount of missiles it can make and new variants coming in. So can you just give us a brief overview, I guess, of why that is in your opinion?
Well, I can try to make it brief, but it might also not be brief. I'm sorry about this.
No, that's more
Uh,
than
I
fine.
believe I believe there are three reasons behind the myth that Russia can produce electronics for their weapons, and this myth started at the beginning of the war. I guess some Ukrainian soldiers get their hands on the circuits of the Russian cruise missiles that hit Kiev and that region, and they checked the components in those circuits, and they listed all the components that are produced in the Western countries or that are produced for the Western companies. And the thing that they failed to grasp is that they never considered if these chips are exclusively produced in Western companies. So I guess in the beginning of the war, the Russian weapons had more Western electronics than now, because even though Russia had the capacity to produce those chips, it didn't because it wasn't financially feasible to produce them. I mean, why would you produce those chips if you can buy them cheaply? And some of the chips that they listed on those, I don't know, maybe this was a CSIS report. One of the chips was LM324, and this chip was designed in 1972. So they assumed that there is no there is no component that can work for LM322 even after 50 years. So they never considered that these chips might also be produced in China. These chips or their analogs might be produced in China, so that Russia might make small alterations in their circuits and then they can use them. Right? They can restart their weapon production. So this is the first part, in my opinion, that started this myth. And the second part is that the Western manufacturing has this mentality that I call post-scarcity research and development mentality, so that they use always the best equipment and the most expensive equipment, and they never consider the feasibility of feasibility of having another way to produce these weapons, these circuits. And the best example is FPGAs. I guess you also shared one of my emails with your audience about FPGAs at one point.
Yes. Could
FPGA
you just explain that again for those who haven't seen that email, what that actually is?
Oh, of course, of course. FPGA stands for Field Programmable Gate Array. And it's basically a set of Lego blocks that you build your circuit. And then in Western weapons, they use this Lego blocks right away after the design. But there's another way to produce these weapons, and it's called MPGA. This is funny because, okay, I'm going to come to this. MPGA stands for Masked Programmed Gate Array. It's funny because P is in both of them, but it means exactly the opposite thing. FPGA is programmable, MPGA is programmed. MPGA is final, you can't make alterations.
Yes.
So what Russia does is that they use FPGAs to design the weapons, test the weapons, and once they reach the final product, they switch to MPGAs. And since all Western weapons use FPGAs, even the engineers that are raised with this research and development mentality didn't consider the possibility that Russia might be using MPGAs instead of FPGAs. And the West had a better grasp of the FPGA market. I guess China entered the FPGA market like 10 years ago, but I'm not sure, maybe a bit earlier, but at least 10 years ago. So they thought that if they can starve Russia of FPGAs, they won't be able to produce chips and weapons. But they were wrong because FPGAs is a luxury. It's not an essential in weapon production. And it actually, has some advantages in some cases. For example, when you produce your weapon, if you don't know when you are going to use the weapon, and if you don't know against which enemy you are going to use that weapon, the ability to reprogram your processor comes in handy. I mean, you can make small alterations, but for Russia, it's not a big deal because they produce it and they use it right away. So it's not a big deal. You can use FPGAs. There's no advantage to using FPGA. And MPGAs are cheaper if you are bulk producing, and Russia definitely bulk produces them. And MPGAs are a bit faster, but it's like 30% faster or 30+% faster. But speed is not an issue. So it's not about speed. It's about availability. It's about cost. So the Tornado S circuit that I shared with you before, it uses MPGAs all over it. And if the timestamps on those chips are correct, they are produced somewhere between 2021 to 2023. So they can produce those chips.
Yeah, so early 2000s.
Yeah, no, 2021 to 2023.
Oh,
so early, in this decade.
Yes.
And the final issue that raised to this myth that Russia can't produce weapons is that most people believe that the weapons use the state-of-the-art technologies in their circuits, and most people know one thing about electronics, and that is the transistor size. They, it's the 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer. That stands for the transistor size. When I was in high school, people only know of the clock frequency. So it's like my PC has 3 gigahertz of processor, and your PC has 2.6 gigahertz. So my PC is better, but it's not the case. So now people forget about the clock frequency because it's become irrelevant actually, and they all focus on the transistor size. Transistor size is important in that if you have a smaller transistor, you can have a higher clock frequency, and your circuit will consume less power. But the main issue here is that power is never an issue in a weapon. I mean, it's an issue with your mobile phone, but it's never an issue in a weapon. And I'll come to the clock frequency later on. Okay, the reason that your mobile phone or PC has high clock frequency is that your PC runs a web browser, maybe Steam, maybe some office programs, all at the same time. So the PC manufacturers can't really anticipate the needs of the end users. And this is why you need a higher clock frequency, and you need a computing philosophy that's called reduced instruction set computing. I'm going to call this RISC. RISC allows your computer to run all these irrelevant, unrelated applications all at the same time. But if you are manufacturing an electronic circuitry for a tank, you know what your tank needs. You know that your tank doesn't need a web browser. You know that your tank doesn't going to run Minesweeper. So you don't have to have a high clock frequency. And actually, I'm telling this as clock frequency. I'm not saying that smaller the chip, the faster the computation, because higher clock frequency doesn't always correlate with faster computation. If maybe I'm going to be a bit technical here. If your chip performs a computation in 200 clock cycles, opposed to, let's say, 2 clock cycles, and even if your clock frequency is 10 times higher, it means that you are 2 times slower. So this is the difference between the reduced instruction set computing and the application-specific integrated circuit, which is called ASIC. And this is what tanks, this is what most weapons have in them. This is why you don't need to have like 7 nanometer or 15 nanometer architectures. You can have 45 nanometer, 90 nanometer architectures, which are called mature node technologies. And actually, engineers know this, but they didn't really, spoil the hype that was going on with the, Russian production capacity and Russian production capabilities about the chip size.
Yes.
I know for a fact that Russia has access to 45 nanometer and 90 nanometer architectures. I don't know their capacity, their production capacity, but I know that they have access to those.
So access
And by the
to produce them as well?
yes, they can domestically produce them.
Yes. So I just want to like really break this down simply because I know you're speaking at a very high level and there's people in my audience who are very high level, but I'll put myself at the bottom. Basically, what I guess you're saying is if Russia wanted to produce iPhones, they might have a problem. But an iPhone has all this other stuff it does. It runs Snapchat and Instagram and PDFs and all this other stuff and GPS and this and that. But so it needs really high-end chips within it. But a weapon system, say a missile or a shell or whatever, it has a single job. It is point A to point B, bounce off a couple of signals or this or that. It's a much simpler electronic circuit. So you're not relying on these absolute then state of the art equipment, electronic equipment then within it. So therefore the chips that Russia can produce, which may be from 10, 20 years ago of when they were state of the art, that's why it hasn't had an effect on the weapons. And if an iPhone factory in Russia may struggle with the sanctions, but if a weapons factory using older technology, we're not seeing that struggle. Is that baseline correct?
It's exactly correct. That's and larger transistor size architectures, and it can still be high end. It can still be refined. But so it doesn't mean that the weapons use like discarded electronics. They still use good electronics, but the good electronics that Russia can produce. But other than that, yes, of course, Russia would probably have problems with producing iPhones, producing PCs, and as I shared with you in an email, they can't produce chips for civilian communications like the 3G, 4G, 5G base stations. But for weapons, they wouldn't have any problems whatsoever.
But those base stations, I think from the email, they won't have too much problem now with China and Huawei. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly correct. And if you remember correctly, if you remember, when US introduced some sanctions to China, they targeted Huawei. They didn't target Xiaomi because Huawei is way more dangerous for the West than Xiaomi, and Huawei challenged the Western duopoly on this market. In the past, only Qualcomm, that's an American company that works business to business, so most people don't know Qualcomm, but they are huge actually. And Ericsson produced those chips. Now Huawei also entered the market and destroyed this duopoly. And Russia wouldn't have problems with these chips as well.
Right. Yeah. So Russia could just buy them from China, from Huawei, even sanctioned, I guess.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, they can buy directly from Huawei, or if Huawei wants to look good for the Western audience, Western countries, they might use intermediaries like maybe Armenia or Kazakhstan or
Yes.
Turkey. It's possible. I mean,
Yeah, of course. Or that's what someone brought up on an interview. Are you going to have inspectors sitting on the Russian-Chinese border inspecting exactly what is going across? It's not realistic. You're not going to have this. It's exactly the same as we've seen Starlinks popping up in Russia too.
yeah, of course. And the thing is that some of the chips that Russia uses in their weapons, some of them might even be getting produced in the Western countries if they are ordered through intermediaries. The thing is that from looking at the circuit design, it would be hard to understand if that circuit is for weapon or for another purpose. So if you order from, let's say, from Singapore or from Hong Kong, from India, it would be hard for the Western companies to track if those chips end up in Russian weapons.
Yeah, yeah, that it makes sense, and it plays into why we thought, and I will fully say I thought this, that we would start seeing an absolute chokehold on Russian equipment, particularly weapons, and we then haven't seen that, and that makes sense. I was always under the opinion that Russia couldn't produce any chips in the beginning, and of course we know that, and you're clearing up they can, but not exact maybe architecture type at the high end.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. Maybe sorry. I thought that Russia would struggle with some sensors because some weapons use some very specialized sensors that are not directly related to these architectures, and I thought that Russia might not have access to them. So I was expecting a drop in the Russian weapon quality as the war progressed, but I didn't see any drop. I don't know if you saw a drop in the Russian weapon quality, but I didn't. So I believe that Russia can produce their sensors domestically as well, or they can buy them from China.
Yeah, I will say I haven't noticed any shift into, say, the missile and sensor quality or drones. If anything, it's probably increased.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, if you consider that Iran, even after all those sanctions, can produce quite nice drones, then why wouldn't you expect Russia to produce at least weapons of similar quality? I guess this was kind of a Western supremacist point of view as well. They thought that they have an inherent superiority over Russia for some reason, and they thought that if they didn't sell chips to Russia, Russia wouldn't find them anywhere else. But I'm now conjecturing here. I'm a bit straight off electronics. Sorry about that.
No, no, not at all. And why do you think it is that, this myth came around that, there would be a chokehold within months on Russian equipment, and why that, it was being announced by officials? And you've said something interesting about scientists like yourself and some language you may use that a politician may not understand exactly the meaning of that. If you can explain this.
Oh, yeah, of course, of course. Actually, this is what we saw with the anti-vax movement as well. The science has a different jargon than the everyday life. When a scientist or an engineer examines something, for example, if I'm reviewing a paper from another researcher, I never say this is wrong. I say that this doesn't make sense to me, or I say that it seems implausible, it seems improbable. I never say it's impossible. I never say it's bullshit. This is the jargon with the science. And going back to anti-vax movement, most of the research papers about regarding whether vaccines cause autism, they say that they couldn't find a link between vaccines and autism. They say that it's improbable that vaccines might lead to autism, but they mean that they don't. It's final. But they can't use this finality in their words. And I also noticed that most of the reports and some of the popular science magazines are actually written by non-engineers. They are like historians or policymakers, and they might not even consult some engineers in those reports. And when finally the Western decision makers make a final decision, I guess that they also ask the opinion of the engineers and checking what the engineers said and checking what the other reports prepared by non-engineers said. They think that, okay, if we close this, this is a this might be a long shot thing, but we can still close an avenue for Russia to produce these weapons. I guess this was the mentality behind them. But the problem here is that that mentality continued later on. We didn't see a drop in the weapon quality, as you said, and they made a new claim that Russia is using chips from washing machines in their electronics. This is how they continued their state of mind, let's say, by introducing new ideas, which are also incorrect, in my opinion.
Yeah, and can you tell us about, because I've never worked on electronics in my life, because there was a myth like the one you brought up that Russia is, stealing washing machines for the electronics. And as well, someone on my podcast who obviously isn't as educated as yourself, and I played into this because I thought it seemed doable, could be stripping electronics out of PCs or phones or whatever. Can you tell us about the challenge that would bring and the necessity it may not be there that Russia would need to do this at all?
But there are actually several reasons behind this. And the first one is that if any of your audience tried to desolder a chip from a circuit, they would know that it's not easy. I don't know if they have a machine that mass desolders equipment. And during the desoldering, you apply heat to all of the pins of the chips, and this might damage the chip. And this is one reason that you wouldn't do that. And the second reason is actually that this is kind of impossible. You would have, if you tell a technician, I work with very good technicians. They do things that I can't even dream of as an engineer. And if you're a very good technician, if you say that your life depends on removing this chip safely, he can do it, but it's not feasible. You are going to get just one chip, and Russia uses it's not just cruise missiles, it's the Tornado-S missiles, it's the Krasnopol shells. You use electronics in everywhere in war, so it would be extremely improbable to keep up desoldering chips this way. And of course, there are many other issues, like you won't be desoldering, you won't be getting a mainstream chip, so you might need to design your circuits differently for each chip that you get, for each model of washing machine that you are desoldering, you are scraping for parts, and you have to test all of these, and then it would take an impossible amount of time to deal with this. It would damage your reliability. You want your weapons to be reliable, and this is also why they use this 45 to 90 millimeter architectures. They are more reliable. This is why they are called mature node technologies. And if you use not custom, random chips in all of your electronics, all of your circuits, then they won't be reliable. And one final issue is that even the chips, the pins won't align directly. So it would be, there are some pin extenders that you can use in your circuits, but again, with the tornado circuit that I shared with you, there were no pin extenders there. And all of the chips stated their manufacturing date. All of the chips stated not a serial number, sorry, a model number, and that model number was in Kirill alphabet. So I'm pretty sure they were all produced for this purpose. I'm pretty sure none of them came out from a washing machine.
How many chips? Just like a rough number, like a missile like that. How many chips are we talking would be inside something like this?
That's impossible to answer, and that's also depends on the definition of chip, because it doesn't have a common definition. I mean, we all agree that processors are chips,
Mhm.
but do we agree that regulators are also chips? You can have some complex regulators that regulate voltage levels in the circuits, and some people might consider them as chips, some people don't. Some of them look like chips, some of them don't. So when you look at that tornado circuits, some of the things that are in there, like some comparators or operational amplifiers, when I say chip, I usually don't mean them.
Okay.
So, and it also depends on the weapon. It depends on the weapon. It depends on the redundancy, as I mentioned in an email to you. You want your weapon to be, reliable. So even if, let's say that a closing weapon system hit your cruise missile 5 times, you still want your cruise missile to work, right?
Yes.
So you design your circuits in a redundant way. So if one of the chips fails, the others take on. So it depends on the design, it depends on a lot of things, but the Tornado system that I shared with you had 3 processors, all with the same model number. This is why I assume that all 3 of them are redundant. But that circuit was multi-level, so I can't really see the connections. And I don't know if even if I see the connections, I can deduce the reasoning behind the connections. But my educated guess is that they use those 3 chips as a redundancy in case one of them fails.
That would make sense for a weapon because I guess reliability, simplicity is reliability, and a weapon system, reliability is first and foremost of many systems of everything, and having redundancies on board. So, for
Yeah,
Russia
I
to,
mean,
sorry, you go.
let me just interject here. I don't know if you had this experienced a blue screen in the last 1 month or 2 months, but in the last 1 month, I experienced blue screen twice in my computer. So, what do you think a blue screen would look like if you have it in a cruise missile?
Uh,
So,
like it'd just go off course. Like if a blue screen on a computer is just nothing would work.
yeah, I mean, yes, but I have no idea what blue screen would look like in a cruise missile, and I'm pretty sure that they don't have blue screens. They are extremely reliable, and the simplicity also introduces extra reliability, as you said, and this is why they don't have blue screens. It's the paramount. It's of paramount importance. It's not the speed. It's not the power consumption. It's reliability.
Yes. Um, with these chips, say like a 45 nanometer or a 90, is there any component in the production of these that the West could actually sanction realistically? Or does Russia have everything from the raw materials to the technology and the people to build these? Is there anything in that that could actually realistically be sanctioned?
I don't think so. I mean, uh, those chips also require some advanced chemicals, and when you go into the smaller transistor size, some of those advanced chemicals are only produced by German or US companies. But with 45 to 90 nanometers, if we consider China and Russia collectively, I'm pretty sure that they have everything they need. I guess Russia itself also has everything it needs, but this is my educated guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's why we haven't seen a drop in uh, the production or the reliability of those weapon systems over the last couple of years, which I think everyone thought and everyone was, I think, reliant on that. There's only going to be, whatever Russia's got in store plus some, stores of chips, and then we're going to see them not be able to produce this. Is there any systems that Russia uses that you, maybe just as a guess, won't be able to produce? Is there any systems you'd think would primarily use chips that they wouldn't be able to domestically produce?
Uh, Apart from the civilian communications chips that I mentioned, no. I guess they have access to everything. And as I told you before, if the sensor if they didn't have access to quality sensors, then we would have seen a drop in the weapon quality. We would have seen a drop in the weapon performance at this point. It's now 2.5 years. So no, I don't think we can sanction them in any way electronically.
It's really interesting. You've really opened my mind to it because I was purely speculating when I talked about this, but you, I guess, give a technical analysis to why we haven't seen that, and I think this is a learning point for the West that they don't now hold the monopoly uh, on bits of technology, maybe like these chips, and that could again have an effect from, I guess, the unipolar to multipolar sort of global order we're going into, and technology is going to be a big part of this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I still believe the West has the lead in chip production. I'm not really sure about the Chinese production capabilities. As I written to in an email, I don't follow the Chinese capabilities day to day. They might be producing 15 nanometer chips. They might even be producing 7. I don't know. I know that they can produce 22 nanometers, and that's what I know. But the thing is that it's not relevant in terms of weapons. And in 1990s, when Russia and China didn't have any of these things, even if the US had like worse chips, older chips, let's say, they had a huge advantage from an electronics perspective. They could do things that Russia and China couldn't do, couldn't even dream of doing. But at this point, I mean, let's assume that you have thermal vision. So let's say that the US can see 14 kilometers with their thermal vision systems, and I'm just speculating. I don't know how deep Russia or US can do it. But anyway, let's say that US can see 14 kilometers with thermal vision. Russia can see 12 kilometers. Is it a big importance? I mean, I don't think so. It's still a lead. It might still be advantageous at some points, but it's not like having night vision and not having night vision.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah, it's closing that gap from what was this to, now this. That, yeah, you bring up a good point. It's not like when we were in fighting the Taliban and we had night vision, they didn't. It might be we've got slightly better, they've got just a bit shitter. That's not and that advantage is getting is getting closed rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage that you get is decrease. It gets to a marginal point where having an extra capability would be. I'm not, sorry. I'm now conjecturing here about warfare. You have been into war. I haven't. But I guess at one point, yeah, you still have the advantage, but it would only be marginal.
Yes. Yeah, in technology like that, I guess adds such a level of complexity, as well as, I'm guessing, cost. Like, I'm guessing a missile that uses all 7.5 or 15 nanometer chips is going to be more expensive to produce than one with 45s or 90s. That's just my guess. And this is one of the issues we have seen with GPS jamming and whatever, is if you've got high tech complex bits of kit that can then be jammed. We've got a high-tech bit of equipment that now is not high-tech, but you've paid the massive amount of cost to then produce it.
Well, I mean the transistor size is not related to jamming, and the thing is that it's not about the cost that they don't use 7 or 15 nanometer chips in their weapons. If they brought something to the table, they would have used them. I mean, at least the West would use 15 nanometer or 7 nanometer chips, but they don't bring anything extra. They bring a low power option, which you don't need. They bring higher clock frequency, which also you don't need. And they take away reliability. This is why they don't use them. And jamming is something other than that. But I agree with you that relying solely on technology might be detrimental at one point.
Yes. Well, Mr. VE, is there anything else we haven't covered on chips that you'd like to go over?
No, I guess this is all I can share at this point. If you don't have any other questions.
Mate, I know there'll be a million questions under this, but mate, I really appreciate, I really, really appreciate you reaching out to me, and especially then hearing me explain some of it through through like my videos, and you go, let's jump on a podcast and do this so I can talk about it because it's in depth. I really do then appreciate that as well. You're helping me and helping a lot out, and really opening my eyes to the components within these. And it makes sense. It makes sense of why a missile does not need all these components. It doesn't need to bring up a web browser and Snapchat and all this other crap. It does a very simple job, but it needs to do that every single time. And that makes sense that, 20-year-old technology from what would have been state of the art back then, why could Russia and China now not produce that en masse? It makes sense. So, mate, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember, I don't know if I told this. The 90 nanometers came to market in 2003, and 45 nanometer came to market in 2007. So these are 20-year-old technologies, and assuming that Russia and China can't have access to 20-year-old technologies is kind of, insane. And thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the invitation. And I really like the way you report these things. So I like your balanced approach to the warfare. And this is my 2 cents that I shared with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a fantastic day.
You too.
Bye-bye.